Welcome to the show. It's a new kind of show. Okay, here it comes. It's working. So, yeah, it's a new kind of idea. It's not really a show, but a new kind of idea. And part of it is that I'm not going to tell you. It could be like a game. What is the new what is the new idea for the way I present this communication channel? Anyway, um, the first thing I wanted to talk about was that I think people need to learn to swim in the information more. To swim. Now, I myself like to think about water. And I don't think that water is a necessarily, um, not necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think that water is like technically or actually uh, the living conscious structure. I just think it's as if it is, right? Like drops of water form a surface tension, and that separates them like the skin of like a cell wall. And then, yeah, and then inside, all kinds of reactions can happen that are isolated from outside. It's a great habitat for little paramecium friends, things like that. But, it's not that water, like water forms a membrane and becomes its own spiritual entity in the material sense, meaning it's mortal, it's just made out of chemicals, but it has a spirit, it's thinking, it's got a little, life, it's a creature, like a little frog. It's not that like a drop of water is that, it's just like the fact that a cell and things made from billions of cells are little sacs of water with a very thin chemical membrane. Not a surface tension membrane, a more robust, or stronger, or whatever you want to call it. And yet it's just this little sack of water, and you have to have water to do the I mean, it might as well be like consciousness is made out of water, right? Because, for example, let's say you take these extremophiles and these ones that can really be dried out. Um, when they're dried out, they go into like this comatose state, like or like a seed. They're ready to come back to life, but there's no way they're consciously processing the little animal information that an animal has to process. A little creature has to. Ooh, is it sugar? No, I need water. If they're all dried out, that's all stopped, like a temporary death. Like death, except for we don't call it death because you don't come back alive from death. So we call it, it's suspended animation. Um, and that's what I mean. You got to swim in the information, right? You don't have to consume. People just are consumers. They want to consume, 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 consume. Even you fellow anti-consumerist. We just have this tendency to think in terms of consumption. So it's like when I say, hey, why don't you swim in this pool of information? You're like, I can't drink all that information. And I'm like, I'm not saying don't drink any of the information. Just take a dive in. And yet, Hythlade, for example, former dear friend, uh, can being a little hyperbolic and sarcastic with dear, but he was a friend. He was a good friend of mine, I thought. Whatever. But anyway, he said, it was insulting and trollish that I would be here to just describe ideas and try to understand ideas of others in order to be able to describe them and to think about them, but not to convince you, right? I'd be more likely to get convinced, not very likely as well, but just as it turns out, I mean, I'm totally open to it. But also that I would not try to convince others is somehow trollish or, um, I've tried to wrap my head around it and think, well, what could I do? Is it really like morally better to, if you're going to make videos, to make them consist just of things that you want to convince other people to think? Because I either don't think that way or I'm the kind of person that would like to think that I don't think that way, where I'm not trying to convince other people of things. I just want to like make you like, hey, here, be aware of this because I want to see how you react to it. So I'm hoping to go, well, what about these ideas? And sometimes it's not even my ideas. I'm like, do you know about these guys' ideas? I see because to me ideas are like chemicals, and so there's different reactions. All pair, any two chemicals and any other two chemicals, they all have these different kinds of reactions, and there's patterns in the reactions. But so I'm not trying to turn you into my kind of chemical. I'm more studying how different chemicals react, and somehow that's I just don't get it. Why would you want a million people with a million different perspectives to all be trying to convert you? And I guess you're not hoping they propagandize you, but they're going to if they all are like out to get a bunch of converts. See, I don't even really believe that's possible. I believe that like when you have somebody like Thunderfoot or the Amazing Atheist, they didn't convert a bunch. The Amazing Atheist didn't convert a bunch of kids into, you know, his fans. You know, he had something they were like, oh yeah, there's something I identified with. And yeah, the fact that they didn't go identify, like they have many parts of themselves and they could go identify with some other channel and maybe they would have grown in a different direction. So, yeah, he helps things grow in that direction, but the seed is in there. It's just like if somebody is taken advantage of or whatever, it might be a narcissistic personality taking advantage of a um, codependent and it's not like the codependent has to say, oh, I'm just like the other person or it's my fault or anything like that. No, just figure out it's a good thing to know, right? And so if you just dive into information and swim around in it, it's like, okay, to be specific, um, reading a white paper, if you know what a white paper is, or a scientific paper and a paper with an abstract. You know, I I always liked reading them, even when I was really young, and just it was way over my head. And it's not that it stops being over your head either. I mean, depending on if you get an expertise in something. But it didn't bother me. You dive in, you hear a few terms. It's like reading science fiction. You don't have to understand every nuance of what the author put in there or was trying to put in there. in order to get a few concepts and ideas out of it. Like Carl Sagan in Contact, pointed out to me a philosophical idea that language is always, a steady signal and a variation in it. That's what it needs. It's those two components, and then I've talked to people about that, and when I was in college, and professors, and I learned a lot from the result of their feedback on it. Um, I had a great professor I had a couple classes with, that had a theory of language. He was a Sanskrit scholar and philosopher. Um, so, like reading white papers, where the point I'm trying to make is you're not going to understand the whole thing. It's just going to kind of wash over you, and you're going to pick out a few words and whatever. That's good. It's like reading science fiction. You get it. You get it. It's not like, oh, I'm not an expert in it, or I'm going to pretend to be an expert in it. You just you see how it goes. And over time, like if you read a lot of certain white papers, um, for example, in programming, I've ended up reading a lot of white papers trying to describe a mathematical or algorithmic process. And they'll do that to various amounts of detail. Like they won't give you the code in your language, they'll do it in math, or not even in math. Some of it will be in words or whatever, and you've got to try to pick that out. And in those kind of cases, I've actually had to get every detail of what they're saying, and if they're vague in some area, I'm going to have to fill in myself. And so in like that kind of white paper, yeah, I actually have become really good in implementing algorithms and mathematical algorithms or functions, from a white paper. But I still read scientific papers that are way over my head in many subjects, and you just catch a few concepts. And then when you're reading it in some popular science news, you've heard it before, and and it pieces together faster, even though, you're not trying to consume the swimming pool, you're trying to swim in the swimming pool. A similar thing is lectures. I always, as a kid, I pretty much enjoyed lectures. I mean, some lecturers, teacher lecturers, are not so good at it, but to me, that doesn't matter if they're flashy or charismatic to listen to. If they know how to put information into what they write on the board and into what they say, then good enough for me, and I'll tend to enjoy it. Um, I was just realizing, because I've been paid lately a lot to kind of like read things. Um, oh, this is required reading for this contract here, so it's like I've got to read it. And I'm like, I would, if I could get paid to read things, I goddamn would not. You could have me read anything. I mean, I have to be paid, you know, relatively well, probably more than you'd want to pay me for just reading things. But I'd even tell you what I thought of things. If I had to write reports on what I had read, I would do that. It would be medium enjoyable. Um, it's also like short videos versus long videos. I like long videos. I often use that over 20-minute thing they have. Now, Gary would probably criticize, because as he's well aware, because in a lot of ways Gary pays attention to certain details and doesn't distort and lie about them, but he catches them. That, I multitask while I see things, but in terms of our conversations where people make video replies in the old days and whatnot, I would watch those multiple times is what I would do there. And also, if I was going to reply to something, I would sit down and watch it just through as well, at least one time, not multitasking at all, because you could get a blind spot, right, and keep ignoring the same things if you're. But that's definitely a sign of swimming in the information, right? I don't put myself on some sort of a thing of like, you're going to listen to this once and you better remember it forever. It's like, if it's that important, I could afford to listen to it a couple times. And yeah, including movies, like there's good movies. I really appreciate I think the best movie is the movie you could watch a bunch of times and either one, enjoy it, or if not exactly enjoy, let's not define enjoy, at least it would invoke a certain feeling, and then it's like at least a meditation of having that feeling, right? Yeah, I'm sure everybody understands that. So the point is, if you swim in information, you can take really highbrow stuff. You can read all those scientific papers and whatnot, and not lie to yourself that you do understand and not worry that you don't understand. And because if you just swim through it, when you get out, you'll find certain ideas or concepts. You're going, hey, I had an idea. As a matter of fact, the danger is you'll be like, hey, I just had an idea, and you won't realize that it was you having a delayed understanding of something that you had read. And it's like, well, that's too bad because you don't know to give credit. There's ways to solve that, but even if you don't solve that, I mean, isn't it just better that you got a new idea? Maybe you think you invented it when in reality it was an after effect, but at least you're getting new ideas, and hopefully good ones. All right. Um, So, it's not that water is alive. It's just like a drop of water is a lot like a living cell. That's all I'm saying. Um, I'm not saying when you drink a glass of water, like, oh, hey, I just drank a half quart of water. I now have a half quart more of consciousness. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's like that. It's as if. Um, Okay, I wanted to mention, because obviously it's totally on topic to everything I've said so far. Um, there's some comments over there. So, I'm going to talk about Kamela and Tulsi, and not really, is it Gillibrand or Gillibrand? Gillibrand. Um, but first, I wanted to mention I've been talking to David the Hillster, and I'm going to talk to him, hopefully in the next week or two, about various things. His dad and his um, actual, particular theories, maybe the theories of some other dissident scientists that he knows. I would definitely like to talk about his definition of dissident science, um, specifically with reference to whether I would count, because I think I count. But I'm not necessarily a dissident, but I do have my own non-conventional views. It's just that they're also compatible with sort of the data as I understand it. But of course, not with every scientific mainstream theory, since a lot of those are contradictory. I mean, you could find particle physicists that say, "Oh no, it's all particles. There's no wave field thing," and you can find the field theorists that are all like, "Well, there's no particles. Those are just a remnant of the experiment." So hopefully, we're going to do that on my channel here. Um, and And just dissident science. I think it's a good word for it. There's a lot of ways. I would have just called it non-mainstream theorists or something like that. But that's trouble. There's trouble there too, because the thing is, science itself has a bunch of contradictory things that are getting funded. So it's easy to go, well, they're all mainstream because they're getting funded, but they're contradictory with each other, right? And then there's things that aren't getting funded by academics that want to get them funded, and they're like, why does nobody want to fund this research? It's really interesting. And then there's people that are, outside of the mainstream, where like somebody would be a funding source might get a bad reputation if they funded that kind of research, and so they don't. Um, and what is that spectrum? What is it that bugs him? Because he's so open-minded to different kinds of theories. This is the dissident scientist. Um, like Jeff Yee's theory of particles, if you know who that is, seems to me one to one with available data, right? So it's definitely different from David's and his dad's idea of the particle system, and it's not the same kind of approach, even though it's not the same particular field as the whole, though it overlaps the whole expanding Earth tectonics. Um, so why can Jeff have all this weird different idea from David's and so on, but if it's is it just because you're funded? I think there's a part of it that has something to do with that, like that it's an unfair allocation of our society's scientific resources or something like that. So, talking to David, he's a really nice guy. I've always been interested in this kind of stuff. I feel like there's a tremendous amount of, like, here's an example that works both ways. Okay, string theory. I was always of the idea that, well, it's just mathematics and it's not testable. And then they started to make these huge colliders, and I'm like, well, it's testable now because it predicts certain particles these colliders will find. Then they made the LHC, and they haven't found any of the particles from string theory, supersymmetry specifically. Now, they may modify their idea and still call that idea string theory, 8.9, but the fact is, the string theory that was starting to be accepted, supersymmetry, it fell apart. And, science is admitting that it fell apart. But anyway, it yielded a lot of good mathematical techniques, and it probed into a lot of property interactions or whatever, in the sense of mathematical relationships over time of various complex systems, and just the very idea of modeling the whole physical system as a 10 or 11 or whatever dimensional thing, and seeing, what's the smallest number of dimensions. It's kind of like Penrose with tiling. He's like, what's the smallest number of tiles you could have that you could tile a space for infinity without repeating yourself? What's the smallest number of tiles to be able to make an unrepeating pattern? String theory mathematically asked and answered questions like that, even though it turned out it wasn't a physical theory. So, and also I actually want to talk to him about that because, yeah, I mean, it's been very slow getting out. But well before the Higgs, before they, got it fixed and could look for the Higgs, they should have found these other particles. And so in the better science press, and closer to the science, where people don't do a bunch of hype. Nobody wanted to make a big deal of supersymmetry. We've been making TED Talks about this shit, about guys, graduate students surfing on the beach inventing this theory. Oops. They didn't want to, nobody wants to make a big promotion of that. Even the people that disagreed with supersymmetry in science don't necessarily want to make a big deal of it. That just makes everybody look bad or whatever. So I guess it's been really slow coming out. But yeah, the whole string theory thing does turn out to be just a bunch of math. And the thing is, though, probably it'll have some relevance. It's just like, conic sections where you have two cones, and if you slice them different ways, you get ellipses and circles and hyperbolas and parabolas and all the shapes that you get from gravitational R squared law, inverse R law kind of motions. And so it was just mathematically frivolous, but it did turn out to have a physical application in the end, which is one of the funny, weird, unexplainable things about math and this patterns in reality. So it's almost like reality contains every pattern. So if you make a new mathematics, it's just a matter of time before you find a pattern that is well explained by it, needs it, or whatever. Um, but string theory is a physical theory, not true. And I feel that way about all of the dissident science stuff. But what's unfortunate is I found it's very hard to talk to the so-called dissident scientists. Um, let's see. Oh, yeah, there was some comments. I'll go see who's in the comments. I have still Kamela and Tulsi to talk about. Okay. Let's see. Stable, genius, progressive. None of these people might be here now. Who knows how long they were. Hey, Pyrrho. Draft science. Oh, I hate draft science. The truth should be the objective, the only objective. Truth. Well, to me, there's a variety of candidates for being the truth, and while we're trying to figure out what the truth is, we have to have a bunch of candidates to consider. Jesus Perez. Information is subjective. We all exist in a matrix made up of only info which we personally let in. Fake news understands this. They don't want us to even be open to other points of view. Well, yeah, that's true, except for you say we exist in a matrix made up of only the info we personally let in. Right. But you can change the filters of what you let in. Right? So, it's not like it's limited, but yeah, it's subjective from your point of view. But if you go ahead and look at all of the information you have available, it's quite a lot. And if you value other people's perspective as well as a way of getting beyond your personal subjective point of view, you receive information about their point of view through your own subjective point of view still, and yet it also is enlightening. Yeah, what we let in is subjective, but you can take that into account. I mean, I just think that's why, well, that's what the swimming in information thing is about. You just dive into the information. Don't worry, you don't have to let it in or not. Feel it, right? Don't drink the poison. Don't drink every water. You don't have to drink every water you swim in, right? When you drink water, that's some special water you're a little careful about. Jesus says Tulsi's great. That's why the media has neutralized her with slander. Interesting. You think she's been neutralized? She isn't getting that great of a chatter. Draft science. He knows almost nothing about the subject he opinions on. Draft science? Doesn't? Jesus. I like rebels in art and science and philosophy. Draft science. 1-to-1 with makeup junk. Don't understand. Jesus Perez. Draft science who? Jesus Perez. True Dat. LHC and string is a dud. Stable genius. He is now. So I missed some of those things, but I understand. You say he is now. It's because I had said something. He is now would make perfect sense. Okay, Kamela. Which is it again? Whatever. Okay, I think a primary is a time to find out who does best. Who does everybody like? It's not going to be decided by just me. I don't want my favorite person that I would most like to be president to go and win the primary, but none of the other voters like him. It's actually a contest where it does matter how many people like you. If people are all going to fall in love with someone like Kamala, I would definitely vote for her over Trump, just like I would even Biden. These are people I'm not thrilled with. Feinstein, not thrilled with. Okay, but at least they're competent. It's like with Bill Clinton. I started out really disliking him, but at least he's competent. At least he knows what he's doing. There's some sort of baseline. He has all sorts of ideas or personal things he might want to profit in, all kinds of standard grade kinds of things I would call corruption. But it's all within a parameter of somebody that knows how to study a situation and see how a particular thing works. How does how do chords work? Not just wing every single aspect of it. Kamela to me is like Kamela. It is Kamela. Kamela to me is like I think she's competent. The first time I noticed her, she was interrogating somebody in the Senate a couple years ago, and I was like, "Who's that?" It's the new senator, and I'd heard of her when she was running, but and I do understand why people would respond positively to her. To me, she's a prosecutor type. She's a law and order, always vote for more cops kind of Feinstein Democrat, I think. Though, a little younger, a little bit into the future on that, but that's basically who she is. I've seen some things. The Majority Report was showing where a couple years ago she was talking about how proud she was that she prosecuted um, the parents of truant children, which is mostly poor people, and it's probably not the best way to solve that particular problem. Well, this is a law and order problem. That's why this happens. But especially since she also had a chance to prosecute Mnuchin. And instead, she didn't. Now he's in the White House. So I don't like. That's not my idea of a law. I would understand somebody that did this prosecution of truant parents and stuff because they believed in law and order if they also prosecuted bankers. So I would like her to talk about that. Tulsi is an interesting thing, similar. I definitely think like her compared to other Democrats, but it's just funny to me. I don't think she's near as progressive as her fans think she is. Um, but again, I'm biased there. Not again. I mean, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I'm biased because I heard about her dad when I was in Hawaii working in local politics and doing things, and for campaigns and stuff in local politics. And her dad's like, I hate fags Republicans. So when she showed up, I'm like, what? And I think at least she's brave. And I think she's honestly more liberal than her dad and stuff. But I don't think the whole story is clear to people from voting stuff and things she says. And she's also a false equivalency Democrat of like, why can't we just all get along? Find in the middle. So I like her. It's fine. I just wish that even Tulsi and Kamala and they're in the Biden and Hillary and Feinstein, where I wish that was our conservatives and we had actual liberals on the other side, because that's fine. They're like conservatives that believe in science, though. Conservatives that don't think that, you know, hating on immigrants is necessary to make money. So I do think that right now, there's these other candidates I'll talk about later. Gillibrand also kind of corporate like that, but I don't want to just like pigeonhole that. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. But more conservative probably than I would prefer. But any of these people would be fine. What I do like about Kamala is that she seems competent. Like, hey, I know how to do a job, and it's like if I'm supposed to fill out this form and do this and do that, and we have to get this done before then. The actual details of the job, not just a bunch of fucking philosophy. So, yeah, that's that. Yeah, Trump 2020. Good luck.